So here I am in Paris, city of lights, city of love and lovers. It is late evening. I'm in my room and I'm preparing for tomorrow's lecture. Tomorrow's lecture is a bit bizarre and interesting. I'm going to discuss identification with the aggressor. When you identify, emulate, and internalize your aggressors, your abusers, values, beliefs, shared fantasy, anyone? So this is Paris by night. I'll shoot another one in the morning. I'll put the two of them together, and then you will be forced to see my ugly face, for which I apologize in advance. I don't think these are the major threats to the existence of the species. I think, for example, the estrangement between men and women, the gender wars, the unigender, is a much bigger threat. Possibly to some extent climate change, although I believe we will learn to adapt to climate change. These are real existential threats. But what is happening right now in terms of authoritarianism, reversion to conservative traditionalist views, and so on and so forth, that has happened dozens of times before in the history of mankind. And we're here. We have survived. One way to look at it is think of it as two mob families, two mafia families, you know. One is the Enlightenment clan, and one is the feudalism clan. And I think we are on our way to Neo-Feudalism. I've been saying it for well over 20 years. So what is the Enlightenment clan? It emerged in the more or less 17th century, and Enlightenment has had a few offspring. First and foremost among them is natural philosophy, later came to be known as science. Science is a child of the Enlightenment. Science is not only the vocation, the occupation itself. Science is a philosophy of how to get to the truth or how to approximate an asymptotic truth. So science includes the scientific method. And then the second child is liberal democracy, or more precisely liberalism, with democracy as its political manifestation or expression. And democracy could be either representational, representative democracy, it could be direct democracy, but in principle, it is the ability of the common man to have a say, real or to some extent imaginary, in the affairs of state and the general conduct and governance of the community and the environment. So there's liberal democracy. And then the third child, I think, is the bureaucracy, best described by Weber. Bureaucracy is impersonal, anti-charismatic, everlasting, inexorable, does not depend on ups and downs and vicissitudes and political changes and winds and so on and so forth. So here's the Enlightenment mafia clan with science, liberal democracy, and bureaucracy. And the thing is that none of them have worked. None of them have worked. Science gave us a clear understanding of the event horizon of a black hole, which is very nice, but you can't do much with it in humdrum pedestrian life. And at the same time, science created the most terrifying weapons which have killed hundreds of millions of people, for example. Science has been discredited not only by its outcomes, but has been discredited by its association with money and the creation of essentially a plutocracy of science. Scientists have become contemptuous, haughty, elitist, and grandiose. They got increasingly more detached from the reality of the very taxpayers who were funding science. And so science has been a failure in terms of enlightening people. And then liberal democracy has failed because it became a vehicle and an instrument in the hands of elites, intellectual elites mainly, who shared very little in terms of beliefs and values with people who were not members of the elites, with the masses. So liberal democracy created a situation where the elites confronted the masses, and the elites leveraged and created and then leveraged bureaucracy. Bureaucracy became a way to subjugate the masses, to keep them in check, to placate them sometimes, but always to threaten them. So liberal democracy was a great promise, started maybe I would say, in the French Revolution. It was a great promise, fraternité, égalité, and all this, and ended up being a standoff. And liberal democracy ended up being a state of conflict and intimidation between the elites and the masses, with bureaucracy weaponized against the masses, when theoretically and historically its purported aim was to help the masses, to better the lives of the masses, to introduce well-being, welfare, and health and education to the masses. So here we were at the very end of the Enlightenment period, on the cusp of a transition from Enlightenment to Neo-Feudalism, which is happening right this very minute as we speak. And all the children or offspring of Enlightenment are hated, discredited, distrusted, and opposed by the constituencies that were supposed to support these things. So science, liberalism, democracy, to some extent some types of capitalism, of course colonialism, mercantilism, all these and the bureaucracies that they've engendered are now considered to be the enemy. And so in human history we've had only two models. One is Enlightenment, which is a relatively new model and has never been tried before in any meaningful way except in the last 300-400 years, and a very ancient, old, tried and true model, and that is a model of feudalism. Now, feudalism includes two main components, two main elements. Feudalism is a theocracy. It's a theocracy. It's a form of religion. It's an offshoot of religion. It uses the hierarchy of religion and translates it into a terrestrial hierarchy, so whatever is happening on earth is a reflection of what's happening in heaven. And so it's a theocracy coupled with an oligarchy, coupled with a tiny group of people who are super rich, and they control all the resources. They allocate these resources, and using religion or religious beliefs or faith, they create in effect a theocracy. And everyone else is an indentured servant, not to say a slave, a vassal. Everyone else is subservient to these oligarchs. Everyone else caters to the needs of these oligarchs. And all the structures are built in a way that ascertains or maintains the superiority of the oligarchs. For example, the law, the legal system, is built to protect the oligarchs, promote their interests at the expense of everybody else. and increasing inequality, not reduce it, even with all transfer payments and so on and so forth. And so theocracy and oligarchy are the components, the ingredients of feudalism. And we see it today all over the world. The oligarchs are the billionaires, the billionaire class. And increasingly, religion is making a comeback. Not only a comeback in terms of philosophy or worldview or a self-soothing technique or mass delusion, but a comeback in terms of political power. And all this is coupled in feudalism with Renaissance totalitarianism. Renaissance was an extension of feudalism. I know this sounds counterintuitive and against everything you've been taught, but the Renaissance definitely was an extension of feudalism. Yes, there was an emphasis on the individual as an organizing principle, but at the same time, Renaissance thinkers such as Machiavelli promoted a personality cult of the chosen, of the prince, of the elites. So Renaissance thinking upheld and supported the oligarchy. The hallowed individual was the successful oligarch, the successful prince, in other words, the successful dictator. And all this was embedded in highly religious motifs. The Renaissance did not reject religion, actually. It transmuted it, but it did not reject it fully. So Renaissance created totalitarianism. And so we have these two competing worldviews, two competing organizational principles, and two clashing explanatory systems, hermeneutic systems. One is the Enlightenment, and one is feudalism. And whereas the Enlightenment has failed the individual, has failed the masses, by essentially removing itself from daily life. Science is exalted and inaccessible to most people. Liberal democracy is a sham in many ways. It caters to intellectual elites, which are completely divorced from humanity. The bureaucracy is impersonal, it's cold, it's calculating, it's cruel, it's inexorable, it's a machine, it's machine-like. So Enlightenment failed to create a meaningful interface with its alleged ostensible constituencies, the hoi polloi, the great unwashed, the people down the street, the common Joe. And so people have rejected now. People are rejecting now Enlightenment and all its values. They're rejecting science in favor of the occult. They're rejecting liberal democracy in favor of authoritarianism. And they are trying to dismantle and destroy the overweening bureaucracies, which are perceived as hateful, antagonistic, conflict-prone. And the only other option people have is feudalism, the re-establishment of religion as a governing force, a system that imbues life with meaning, purpose, and direction. So, theocracy, the rule of religion. And the rule of religion via a handful of oligarchs, super rich people who essentially control all the resources, which is now known as inequality. So feudalism is theocracy plus oligarchy, and the only twist is Renaissance. Renaissance and the prince, the cult of personality, totalitarianism, egotism, or in other words, narcissism. Now we have clash of the titans, the two mob families duking it out. The Enlightenment on the one hand, with its seat mainly in Europe, where it started. Enlightenment is absolutely European. It's not Asiatic. It's not American. So we have the Enlightenment on the one hand, and feudalism and totalitarianism on the other hand. And I think feudalism, totalitarianism is going to win because Enlightenment doesn't have anything communicable to offer to the masses, and it is highly perceived as elitist and even contemptuous of the masses. This is where we are. It's not the end of humanity. It's just regression. It's just going back. It's just adopting a new model, the totalitarian feudalism model, and rejecting the Enlightenment and everything it had to offer. That includes intellectuals, science, democracy, liberalism, progressivism, bureaucracy, and all this. In this sense, we are going through a nihilistic period. It's nihilistic not because there's a choice of destruction as the ultimate value system, but because there is a need to destroy first, to first destroy institutions, beliefs, doxastic systems, value systems, axiological system. There's a need to destroy first the Enlightenment, to uproot it, to eradicate it, to pulverize it. And of course, the period, this extended period of reversing the Enlightenment is nihilistic in many ways. But on the horizon, there is a vision, and it's a pretty clear vision. And it's a vision of the Middle Ages. And I'm not using the phrase Middle Ages in a derogatory way. Middle Ages, historically speaking, where feudalism ruled the earth. Added to that is a modern touch, not postmodern, but modern touch, and that would be the Renaissance and its totalitarianism, the embodiment of feudalism in a single leader and the cadre of oligarchs around this leader. We have seen a precursor of this in Adolf Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and so on and so forth. We have been the earthquake that is now demolishing the Enlightenment started 100 years ago. And experiments such as Nazism and fascism and communism were attempts to reconcile the Enlightenment with Renaissance totalitarianism. Communism pretended to be an extension of the Enlightenment. And so it failed, and people realized that there is no way, there is no possible compromise. One has to choose between these two models. And I think people have made their choice in the past 20 years. And I think we are on our way to Neo-Feudalism, coupled with totalitarianism, 20th century totalitarianism, which is a direct extension of Renaissance narcissism.